Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Whisper Zone. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious. Where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. I never thought I'd be writing this down, but people need to know what happened in these mountains. My name is Michael Thompson, and I've been a park ranger at Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest for 15 years. What I saw last summer changed everything I thought I knew about our world and about what lurks in the shadows of ancient forests. It started during what should have been the hottest week of July. I was doing my usual patrol, checking on campers and making sure no idiots had started illegal fires. The air was sticky with heat that morning, but something felt off. You know that feeling when the air gets heavy before a storm? It was like that, but different. Wrong, somehow. I remember standing at my favorite lookout point, wiping sweat from my forehead when everything changed. The temperature dropped so fast my coffee mug cracked. One minute I was burning up in my ranger uniform, the next I could see my breath-forming clouds in front of my face. That's not normal. Not in July, not even in Washington. I've seen a lot of weird things in my years as a ranger, but nothing like this. Before the war, before I served in the Pacific, I might have brushed it off. But combat teaches you to trust your gut, and my gut was screaming that something wasn't right. Earlier that week, we'd found some old Native American drawings on a rock face near Eagle Creek. I'm no expert, but I'd never seen anything quite like them. They showed these tall, skinny figures surrounded by what looked like snowflakes. The local tribal expert who came to look at them got real quiet, muttered something about winter spirits, and left in a hurry. Should have paid more attention to his reaction. Then the missing persons reports started coming in. First, it was the Miller couple, experienced hikers who knew these trails better than some of my junior rangers. Then Sarah Chen, a photographer who'd come to shoot the summer wildflowers. 3 people don't just vanish in 1 week. Not in my forest, but the thing that really got to me, the ice. We found it growing in places where there shouldn't be any ice, not even in winter. Perfect crystal formations, like frozen spider webs, spreading across rocks and tree trunks. When I touched one, it was so cold it burned my finger through my glove. I've been alone since Marie passed away 2 years ago. The silence in my cabin used to feel heavy, filled with memories of her laugh and the smell of her coffee. But now the silence feels different, like something's waiting in it. Last night, I woke up to the sound of cracking ice outside my window. When I looked out, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were footprints in the frost that had somehow formed on the ground. Human footprints that changed halfway across my yard, turning into something that looked like deer hooves, but bigger, much bigger. I've fought in a war. I've faced things that still wake me up screaming, some nights, but nothing prepared me for what I was about to discover in these mountains. And it all started with those impossible ice crystals growing in the middle of a heat wave, pointing like frozen arrows toward the ancient caves up in the high country. I wish I could say this was just the beginning of a strange few days, but it was the start of a nightmare that would force me to face not just the horrors hiding in these mountains, but the ones I've been carrying inside me since the war. And somewhere out there, in the darkness of the forest, something is watching, waiting, and it's getting colder by the minute. The next morning, I got a call on my radio that changed everything. One of our junior rangers, Tommy, found something strange near Crystal Lake. His voice was shaking so bad I could barely understand. Mike, you need to see this, please hurry. I'd known Tommy for 3 years and I'd never heard him sound scared before, not even when we had to chase off that angry mama bear last spring. I grabbed my gear and headed out. The morning was eerily quiet. Usually you can hear birds singing, squirrels chattering, all the normal forest sounds, but today, nothing. Just the crunch of my boots on the trail and my own breathing. I found Tommy standing next to what used to be a deer. The animal was frozen, solid, like it had been stuck in a freezer. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was the marks on it. clean, precise cuts, like someone, or something, had used an ice-cold knife. The cuts were too perfect to be from any animal I knew. "I've never seen anything like this," Tommy whispered. "Look at the ice around it. The ice crystals around the deer weren't normal. They formed perfect geometric shapes, like someone had drawn them with a ruler. I'd seen ice formations before, but nothing like this. They seemed to grow while we watched, spreading out in exact patterns that didn't make any sense. That's when we heard it. Our radios crackled to life, but instead of voices we heard something that made my skin crawl. It sounded like ice cracking, but underneath that was something else, something that almost sounded like words. "We should check the hiking trails," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "3 people are still missing." We split up. Maybe not. The smartest move, looking back. I took the upper trail while Tommy checked the lower one. That's when I saw the tracks. They started as human footprints in the frost-covered ground. Normal enough, could have been from one of our missing hikers. But then they changed. Right in front of my eyes, the human prints morphed into something else. Something with hooves, but bigger than any deer or elk I'd ever tracked. The prints were somehow frosted over, even though it was barely cold enough for frost. I followed the tracks for about a quarter mile before they just stopped. Like whatever made them had vanished into thin air. But what really got to me was what I saw when I looked up. Animals, dozens of them, all running away from the same direction. Deer, elk, even a couple of bears. They were fleeing from something up in the high country, and they were terrified. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never seen anything like it. I pulled out my binoculars to look where they were running from. That's when I saw the ice cave. It wasn't there last week, I'm sure of it. The entrance was covered in those same perfect ice crystals, but bigger. They seemed to pulse with a faint blue light. My radio crackled again. This time, through the sound of cracking ice, I heard something that made my blood freeze. It was Marie's voice, my dead wife's voice, calling my name. "Michael, come find me." I dropped the radio like it had burned me. That's when I noticed how cold it had gotten. The temperature had dropped so fast my breath came out in clouds. And in the distance, up near that ice cave, something moved. Something tall and thin, like a tree swaying in the wind. But there wasn't any wind. My instincts screamed at me to run. Every fiber of my being said to get out of there. But I couldn't. Not with 3 missing people out there. Not with Tommy somewhere on the lower trail. Not with whatever this was. In my forest, I clicked my radio, trying to reach Tommy. All I got back was that horrible cracking sound. And underneath it, faint and far away, someone crying for help. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows through the trees. As darkness crept in, those perfect ice crystals began to glow brighter. And somewhere in the forest, something was watching me. I could feel it. I had to make a choice. Head back to the ranger station for help or push on toward that ice cave. Either way, I knew things would never be the same. Whatever was out there, it wasn't natural. And it wasn't going away. I made my decision. I couldn't leave Tommy out there alone. As I headed toward the ice cave, the cold got worse. My fingers went numb even through my gloves, and my breath came out in thick white clouds. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a weird shadow between the trees. You know how your mind plays tricks on you in the dark? But this shadow moved, and it was huge. It stood at least 12 feet tall, like a person stretched out too thin. Its skin, I don't even know if you could call it skin. It looked like ice you can see through, with dark shapes moving underneath. Every time it moved, I heard that same cracking sound from the radio. I froze behind a tree, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could hear me. The thing turned its head. Too far, way too far, like a broken doll. That's when I saw its eyes. They were completely white, like frozen milk, but they glowed with a blue light that matched those strange ice crystals. Suddenly, the air around it turned to snow. Just like that, a mini blizzard appearing out of nowhere. The moisture in the air froze instantly, creating sheets of black ice that spread across the ground like spilled ink. When the ice touched a tree, the bark cracked and split with a sound like gunshots. "Help! Somebody help me!" The voice came from near the creature. It sounded exactly like Sarah Chen, our missing photographer. But something was wrong with it. Like the voice was coming through broken speakers. Then I heard Tommy's voice behind me. "Mike, what's going on?" I spun around, ready to tell him to run, but Tommy wasn't there. The voice came again, this time from a different direction. The creature was playing tricks, using voices like bait in a trap. I remembered what the tribal expert had said about winter spirits, and suddenly the pieces started falling into place. The impossible cold, the perfect ice formations, the missing people. This thing, it was hunting us. That's when I found the first body. It was one of the missing hikers, Jim Miller. He was frozen solid, his face twisted in a look of pure terror. His skin had a blue tint, and around his body those geometric ice crystals formed a perfect circle. When I got closer, I noticed something that made me sick. Parts of him were missing, like something had taken precise frozen bites. The worst part. The ice around him was so cold that when I accidentally knocked his arm with my boot, it shattered like glass. I had to turn away and throw up. My radio crackled again. This time, through the static, I heard Tommy's real voice, not the fake one the creature had used. "Mike, by the old ranger cabin. Please, it's so cold." His voice was weak, but was really him. I knew that cabin. It was about half a mile east, used for storage now. I had to get to him, but as I turned to go, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. A trail of black frost was creeping toward me across the ground. Wherever it touched, the grass and leaves instantly froze and crumbled. And at the end of that trail, the creature stood there, its long arms hanging down past its knees. Its fingers ended in sharp points that looked like icicles. It opened its mouth, too wide, impossibly wide, and I saw rows of teeth that gleamed, like frozen daggers. The temperature dropped so fast my eyes hurt. I could feel the cold trying to freeze my tears, freeze my breath in my lungs. The thing took a step toward me, and the ground cracked under its feet. I had two choices: run toward the ranger cabin and try to save Tommy, or run back to my truck and get help. But something told me, if I left now, there wouldn't be anything left of Tommy to save. The creature lifted one long, terrible arm and pointed at me. And then in a voice that sounded like breaking ice and screaming wind, it spoke. "You, stay." I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out my flare gun, the one I always carry for emergencies. The creature was made of ice, right? Maybe. Just maybe. But before I could fire, everything went white. The thing had created another instant blizzard, and in the swirling snow I heard it laugh. The sound was like an avalanche in slow motion. I ran like I've never run before, toward the old ranger cabin. Behind me, I could hear it following, its feet crunching on the frozen ground. And all around me, the forest was turning to ice. I made it to the old ranger cabin just as my flashlight died. My lungs burned from running in the freezing air, and my legs felt like they were made of lead. But I knew that thing was still out there, somewhere in the darkness. "Tommy?" I whispered, pushing open the cabin door. "You in here?" The door creaked open and I smelled something wrong. You know that smell when you open a freezer that's been unplugged too long? It was like that, but worse. My backup flashlight showed me why. The whole inside of the cabin was covered in ice. Not normal ice, those same perfect crystal patterns I'd seen before. And in the middle of the room stood Jack Miller, my partner of 10 years. But something was wrong with Jack. He was just standing there, staring at the wall. Frost covered his ranger uniform, and his breath wasn't making clouds in the cold air. He wasn't breathing at all. "Jack?" My voice shook. "Where's Tommy?" He turned around slowly, too slowly. His eyes, they were white, like the creature's. Little ice crystals grew around them, spreading across his face like frozen spider webs. "So hungry, Mike," he whispered, but his voice wasn't his anymore. It sounded like ice cracking. "So very hungry." It's been so long since I ate anything warm. That's when I saw Tommy. He was propped up in the corner, frozen solid. His face was peaceful, like he'd just fallen asleep. At least he hadn't suffered. "Jack?" "This isn't you," I said, backing toward the door. "Whatever that thing did to you, we can fix it." He smiled, showing teeth that had turned sharp and gleaming like icicles. "Fix it? Why would I want to fix it? I can feel the hunger now, Mike. The real hunger, the one that never goes away." He took a step toward me, and the floorboards frosted over under his feet. "Do you know how long I've been trapped in that ice cave? Centuries. Waiting. Watching the world get warmer, the ice melting away. But now I can feed again. It wasn't Jack talking anymore. The thing, the Wendigo, was using him like a puppet. The tribes knew about me," he continued, taking another step. "They left warnings. Those pictures you found? They weren't warnings about winter spirits, Mike. They were warnings about me. I reached for my flare gun, but my fingers were so cold I fumbled and dropped it. Jack, or whatever he'd become, laughed. I've taken so many over the years. I trapped them in my ice, kept them fresh. Would you like to see? There's a whole collection in my cave." That's when I remembered something. Earlier that day, I'd put emergency road flares in my backpack. If I could just reach them. Jack moved faster than anything human could move. His hand shot out and grabbed my throat. His touch was so cold it burned. "I'll show you," he said. "I'll show you everything." He started dragging me toward the door. I tried to fight, but his grip was like iron. Outside, the real Wendigo waited in the swirling snow. It stood there, watching, those milky white eyes glowing. As Jack pulled me into the night, I saw other shapes moving in the darkness. Frozen. Figures walking stiffly through the trees. All the missing people from over the years turned into ice puppets just like Jack. "The hunger spreads," Jack whispered in that horrible cracking voice. "That's how we grow. That's how we survive. And soon you'll feel it too." The Wendigo raised its long arms, and the snow whirled faster. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was Jack's frozen laugh, and the feeling of being dragged through the snow toward that impossible ice cave. I thought that was the end. I really did. But what happened next in that cave, that was worse than anything I could have imagined. Much worse. I woke up in the ice cave. The cold was so bad I couldn't feel my legs anymore. Everything glowed, with that strange blue light coming from the ice crystals. That's when I saw them all. Bodies. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All perfectly preserved in the ice walls of the cave, like some twisted museum. Some looked recent. I recognized the missing hikers from this summer. Others were so old they wore clothes I'd only seen in history books. Beautiful, aren't they? Jack's voice echoed through the cave. He stood near the entrance, his skin now almost completely transparent like the Wendigo's. Each one adds to our strength. Each one helps the hunger grow. The real Wendigo loomed behind him, its long arms scraping the cave ceiling. Other frozen figures shuffled around them, their puppet army of victims. That's when I noticed where they'd put me. I was propped against the cave wall right next to a pile of old dynamite boxes. My mind started racing. Those must be from the old avalanche control supplies we'd stored up here years ago. I still had my matches in my pocket. If I could just reach them? "You're different, Mike," Jack said, walking closer. "You've seen death before, caused it even in the war. The hunger already knows you." He was right. I had seen horrible things in the war, done horrible things. The nightmares still haunted me. But this was different. The tribes tried to stop us. The Wendigo spoke, its voice like breaking glaciers. They buried their dead here with warnings. Their spirits kept us trapped. But now the ice melts. Now we are free. My fingers found the matches. Just a little more time. "You'll join us soon," Jack said. "Just like I did, just like all of them did." He waved at the frozen bodies in the walls. "The hunger makes everyone the same in the end." That's when I saw her, Marie, my wife, frozen in the ice right above me. But that was impossible. She died in the hospital. I'd watched her go, and old trick. The Wendigo laughed, seeing my face. Your wife's image taken from your mind. We use what we find there. The grief, the guilt, the hunger for what's lost. Something snapped inside me. They'd used Marie's voice to lure people here. Used her memory like it was nothing. The rage warmed me up just enough to move. You know what I learned in the war? I said, gripping the matches. Sometimes the only way to stop a nightmare is to burn it all down. I struck the match. Jack's eyes widened. He knew about the dynamite too. No! He screamed, lunging for me. But I was ready. I threw the lit match at the old dynamite boxes and rolled behind a wall of ice. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed. The ceiling started coming down. Huge chunks of ice and rock rained everywhere. The Wendigo screamed, a sound I'll never forget, as the cave began to collapse. Mike! Jack's voice was his own again, just for a moment. I'm sorry. Then everything went white. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. They'd found me half a mile from the cave, barely alive. The whole mountainside had come down in what they called a freak avalanche. They never found any other bodies. That was 5 years ago. I retired from the ranger service after that. My leg never quite healed right from the cold. But sometimes, on winter nights, I turn on all the lights in my house and listen to the wind. Because last week I saw something in the newspaper that made my blood run cold. Unusual ice formations found as glacier retreats. The headline read, Scientists are baffled by perfectly geometric ice crystals growing where the old avalanche site is melting. And last night, when the power went out during a storm, I heard something on my radio. Through the static, underneath the sound of cracking ice, I heard voices calling for help. I'm writing this down now because people need to know, need to be ready, because the ice is melting, and what's trapped inside, it's getting hungry again. But this time I'll be ready. I've got a whole garage, full of road flares, and I know now, some things are worth burning for. The first lightning bolt missed my truck by inches. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding as the burning smell of scorched earth filled my nose. Through my windshield, I watched the red desert sand turn to black glass where the lightning had struck. Welcome to Chaco Canyon, I thought. Some homecoming. My name is Diana Wolf, and after 15 years away, I was finally returning to my ancestral lands. Not exactly how I'd planned to spend my life at 35. Divorced, starting a new job as a park ranger, and moving into a tiny cabin in the middle of nowhere. But after 3 tours as an army medic and a failed marriage, nowhere was exactly where I needed to be. The sun was setting as I pulled up to the ranger station, painting the massive sandstone cliffs in shades of blood and gold. This place hadn't changed much since I'd visited as a kid with my grandmother. The ancient pueblo, ruins still stood silent against the sky, their walls holding 1,000 secrets. Some good, some, well, let's just say there's a reason our tribal elders tell us not to visit certain places after dark. You must be Diana, a cheerful voice broke through my thoughts. My new boss, Mike Thompson, came walking out of the station. He was shorter than me, with kind eyes and skin tanned like old leather from years in the sun. Hope the drive wasn't too bad. Just some weird weather, I said, not mentioning the lightning. Something told me to keep that to myself. Mike helped me unload my truck, chatting about park rules and tourist schedules. But I was only half listening. My eyes kept drifting to the towering canyon walls, where centuries-old petroglyphs told stories of my ancestors. One in particular caught my eye. A massive bird, its wings spread across the red rock with strange spiral patterns around it that I'd never noticed as a kid. That's new, I muttered. What's new? Mike asked. Nothing, I said quickly. Just talking to myself. As we walked to my cabin, Mike pointed out the important spots. The visitor center, the emergency radio tower, the main hiking trails. But he saved the most important thing for last. Whatever you do, he said, his voice turning serious, stay away from the North Canyon after sunset. We've had some incidents up there. Probably just kids messing around, but still. I nodded. But something in his tone made the hair on my neck stand up. I'd treated enough combat wounds to know when someone wasn't telling the whole truth. That night, as I unpacked my few belongings in the cabin, the wind picked up outside. It moved through the canyon in a way I'd never heard before. Not quite a whistle, not quite a scream. Almost like words in a language too old to remember. I walked to my window and looked out at the desert darkness. The moon was full, casting strange shadows on the canyon walls. In one of them, I could have sworn, I saw something move, something huge with wings that stretched impossibly wide. But that was crazy. The largest birds in New Mexico were eagles, and this shadow had been bigger than my truck. Must be tired from the drive, I told myself. Just as I was about to turn away, all the lights in my cabin flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, I heard it, a sound that shook the windows and rattled my bones. Part thunder, part screech, and part something else, something that sounded an awful lot like my name. I stood there in the dark, my combat instincts kicking in. This wasn't the war zone anymore, but somehow I knew I was still in for one hell of a fight. Whatever was out there in the canyon knew I was here, and it had been waiting for me. My first week at Chaco Canyon started normally enough. Every morning I'd patrol the trails, help lost tourists, and check on the ancient ruins. But things started getting weird on Wednesday. I was walking near one of the burial sites when I noticed something wrong. The ground had been disturbed, not by animals but by human hands. Someone had been digging where they shouldn't. My stomach turned when I saw broken pieces of ancient pottery scattered around. "Mike," I called into my radio. "You need to see this." He arrived 20 minutes later, his face going pale at the sight. "Third time this month," he muttered, then caught himself. "I mean, first time I've seen anything like this." I gave him a look. "Why didn't you tell me about the other times?" Before he could answer, the sky went dark. Not normal, cloudy dark. More like someone had turned off the sun. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. "Storm's coming," Mike said, but his voice shook. This was no ordinary storm. My phone's screen went crazy, flashing on and off. The radio at my hips squealed with static. That's when I noticed something strange under my boots. The rocks were pulling at them like magnets. I picked one up. It was warm and made my fingers tingle. "Mike, look at this." But Mike was staring at something behind me, his face white as paper. "Diana, don't move." I turned slowly. About 50 feet away, next to the ancient kiva, stood a man. At least, I thought it was a man until he moved. His steps didn't leave any marks in the sand. The air around him seemed to shimmer like heat waves on hot pavement. "Sir," I called out, using my best ranger voice. "This area is off limits." He turned to look at me. That's when my blood went cold. Where his face should have been, there was only shadow. Then, like smoke in the wind, he vanished. The sky cleared instantly. My phone stopped glitching, but the magnetic rock stayed warm in my pocket. Back at the station, I started asking questions. The cleaning lady, Mrs. Begay, was an elder from my tribe. She'd worked here for 30 years. When I mentioned the shadow man, she dropped her coffee mug. "You saw him?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Near the kiva? You know something about this?" She sat down, her hands shaking. "My grandmother told me stories. About the guardian. About the great bird that watches over sacred places. When people disturb the dead." She shook her head. "Bad things happen." "What kind of bad things?" "Last month, 2 men came to steal artifacts. They were found 5 miles away in the desert. Their cameras were melted. They couldn't speak for days. When they finally could, they talked about lightning that moved like snakes and wings made of metal. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind was back, whispering in that strange language. I took out the magnetic rock and nearly dropped it. It was glowing, giving off a faint blue light. Somewhere in the canyon, I heard that screech. Again, closer this time. The windows rattled and my lights flickered. In the darkness, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. The message made my heart stop. "Protect them." Below it was a symbol, the same spiral pattern I'd seen around the bird petroglyph. The rock in my hand grew hot. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of rain and electricity. But when I looked out my window, the sky was clear, except for one thing, a shape moving among the stars. Something huge, something impossible, something with wings that blocked out the night sky, and it was circling my cabin. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those massive wings against the stars. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all. Almost. The magnetic rock was still warm in my pocket when I started my morning patrol. The air felt heavy, like just before a big storm. That's when I heard the screaming. 2 teenage tourists were running down the trail, their phones held up, trying to film something behind them. "It's huge," one of them shouted. "Did you see its eyes?" I ran toward them. "What happened?" They stopped, breathing hard. The girl pointed up at the canyon rim with a shaking hand. "We were taking pictures, and she showed me her phone. But the screen was black, dead. "Something up there," the boy said. "Like a bird, but bigger than a plane. Its eyes, they were glowing blue like lightning." I radioed Mike, but got only static. The air crackled with electricity, making my hair stand on end. That's when I heard it. A sound that shook the whole canyon. Part thunder, part screech, like the night before, but 100 times louder. The teenagers ran for the visitor center. I should have too. Instead, I walked toward the sound. The temperature dropped fast. Storm clouds appeared from nowhere, spinning like a tornado was forming. But the clouds, they weren't moving right. They were spinning around something. That's when I saw it. The Thunderbird broke through the clouds like a living storm. Its wingspan was wider than a house, each feather gleaming like polished metal. Lightning danced between its wings and its eyes. God, its eyes were balls of blue fire. I couldn't move. Not because I was scared. Okay, I was terrified. But because something was holding me in place. The bird's screech paralyzed every muscle in my body. It landed on the canyon rim above me, its metal feathers scraping against stone with a sound like swords being sharpened. This close, I could see patterns in its feathers, the same spiral designs from the petroglyphs. The bird looked right at me. Not like an animal looking at prey, more like it knew me. A voice filled my head, not in words exactly, but in feelings and images. I saw the burial grounds, the disturbed graves. I saw men with shovels and trucks coming at night. I saw the sacred places being destroyed. "You want me to protect them?" I whispered. The Thunderbird's eyes flashed. More. Images flooded my mind. My grandmother telling me stories, teaching me the old ways. Me in my army uniform, helping people. The magnetic rocks forming a line pointing to something. Lightning struck the ground in a circle around me, but I wasn't afraid anymore. Each bolt left behind a magnetic rock, forming a pattern, an arrow, pointing north to the Forbidden Canyon. The Thunderbird spread its wings and the air filled with electricity. Just before it took off, it looked at me one last time. In my head, I heard words as clear as day. "Blood remembers. The old ones chose you." It lifted off with a thunderclap that knocked me to my knees. The storm clouds followed it, swirling like a tornado up into the sky. Within seconds, the air was clear again, but the magnetic rocks remained, still pointing north. My radio crackled to life. "Diana?" Mike's voice was panicked. "Diana, come in. The weather equipment's going crazy and, we've got tourists reporting." "I'm okay," I said. "But Mike, we need to talk about everything you haven't told me." I picked up one of the magnetic rocks. It was pulsing now, like a heartbeat. Above me, fresh petroglyphs had appeared in the canyon wall, carved by lightning. They showed a bird, a woman, and a spiral. My phone buzzed. Another message from the unknown number. "They come tonight, be ready." The rock in my hand grew warmer. Storm clouds were gathering again in the north over the Forbidden Canyon. Whatever was coming, I had a feeling this was just the beginning. And this time, I wouldn't be facing it alone. Mike's office was too small for the stack of papers he dumped on his desk. Police reports, visitor complaints, and blurry photos spilled everywhere. "It started 3 months ago," he said, rubbing his tired eyes. "First, just weird weather. Then the magnetic rocks started showing up. Then what?" He pulled out a photo. It showed a truck or what was left of one. The metal was twisted like someone had crumpled it like paper. Artifact smugglers. They were trying to steal from the burial grounds at night. Something stopped them. The Thunderbird, I said. Mike nodded. The local tribes have been warning us for years. About the Guardian, about the sacred places. I didn't believe them until I saw it with my own eyes, 2 weeks ago. Why didn't you tell me this when I started? Would you have believed me? He had a point. Besides, something's different now. It's getting more active, like it's warning us. I showed him the magnetic rocks, how they pointed north. His face went pale. The North Canyon, he whispered. There's something up there, something the previous ranger found before he quit. He only told me one thing about it, that it was older than the Pueblos, older than anything we've found here. I needed to know more. That afternoon, I visited Mrs. B. Gay's house just outside the park. Her living room was filled with old books and tribal artifacts. She served me tea that smelled like sage. My grandmother would have been happy, she said, seeing you here now. She always said the old blood would remember. What did she mean by that? Mrs. B. Gay opened a worn leather book. Inside were drawings, the same spiral patterns I'd seen everywhere. Our people have always known about the Guardian. The Thunderbird chose protectors from each generation. People with the old blood. People like you, Diana. She turned the page to a drawing of a woman standing beneath the Thunderbird's wings. The woman wore army clothes. This is impossible, I whispered. This book is ancient. How? The Thunderbird sees across time, she said simply. It knew you were coming. Just like it knows they're coming. Who's coming? The ones who want what's hidden in the North Canyon. The thing the Thunderbird has protected for 1,000 years. She gripped my hand. Child, why do you think those magnetic rocks appeared? They're not just pointing the way, they're weapons. My phone buzzed. Another message midnight, they come with machines. Mrs. B. Gay saw the message and stood up quickly. She went to an old chest and pulled out a necklace, a silver pendant with the spiral pattern. This was your grandmother's. She left it for when you were ready. The moment I put it on, the magnetic rocks in my pocket grew hot. Outside, thunder rolled across clear skies. The rocks, Mrs. B. Gay said, they respond to the old blood, to the pendant. They're not just magnetic. They're pieces of the Thunderbird's feathers. I drove back to the park as the sun was setting. The magnetic rocks were vibrating now, almost humming. In the distance, I heard engines, heavy trucks moving somewhere in the darkness. My radio crackled. Mike's voice was urgent. Diana, multiple vehicles entering the North Canyon. They've got drilling equipment. The necklace grew warm against my skin. Above me, the stars were disappearing behind storm clouds that formed out of nowhere. The wind carried that ancient whisper again, but this time I could almost understand it. The Thunderbird had chosen me to protect something. Now I knew why it had to be me. A combat medic who knew how to fight, who knew the old ways, who had the old blood. I grabbed my flashlight and the magnetic rocks. The rocks were pulling north now, almost lifting off my palm, like they were eager for what was coming. In the darkness ahead, I saw headlights moving up the forbidden canyon. Behind me, thunder crashed like a warning. Time to find out what the Thunderbird had been protecting all these years. And time to show these grave robbers why you don't mess with sacred ground. The trucks came to a stop near an ancient cliff wall. In the moonlight, I counted 5 vehicles and at least 12 men. They had drilling equipment and boxes that looked like dynamite. My stomach turned. They were planning to blast their way into something. I crouched behind a boulder, my hand tight around the magnetic rocks. The pendant at my neck pulsed like a second heartbeat. Above, the storm clouds gathered, but the men didn't seem to notice. "Hurry up!" their leader shouted. "That storm's coming fast. The wall should be right here according to the map." Map? I leaned closer, trying to hear more. That's when my radio crackled, loud. "Diana?" Mike's voice burst through. "Where are you?" The men spun around, flashlights cutting through the dark. I ducked, but it was too late. "Someone's here." One man yelled, "Find them!" I ran, remembering my army training. Stay low, use the shadows, don't make noise. But these guys were professionals too. They split up, moving to surround me. That's when I saw it. What they were looking for. And the cliff wall wasn't natural. Behind centuries of dirt and rock, there were carved symbols. The spiral pattern was everywhere, but bigger than I'd ever seen it. A gunshot cracked the night. They weren't just grave robbers. They were willing to kill. "We can't have witnesses," the leader called out. "Find them." The magnetic rocks grew, so hot they almost burned. The pendant blazed against my skin, and then I understood. The rocks weren't just pointing the way. They were trying to tell me something. I grabbed one and threw it at the nearest truck. The rock stuck to the metal. With a loud clang, suddenly all the magnetic rocks flew from my pocket, spreading out like they had a mind of their own. They attached themselves to the trucks, the drilling equipment, the men's guns. The leader noticed too late. "What the?" Thunder crashed so loud it shook the ground. The Thunderbird's screech filled the canyon, but different this time. Angry. The clouds above us started spinning, forming a funnel. "The Guardian!" one of the men screamed. "It's real!" The Thunderbird burst from the clouds, its metal feathers blazing with lightning. Its wings spread wider than ever, filling the canyon wall to wall. But it didn't attack. Instead, it looked at me and sent a single thought. "Now." I grabbed my pendant and somehow knew what to do. The old blood remembered. I raised it toward the magnetic rocks, and pure electricity arced between them. The rocks blazed blue, creating a web of lightning that connected every piece of metal. The men's guns grew too hot to hold. The truck's engines died. The drilling equipment sparked and melted. The leader pulled out a detonator. "If we can't have what's in there, no one—" The Thunderbird's screech paralyzed him mid-sentence. I ran forward and kicked the detonator away. My combat training kicked in as I disabled him with a quick move. Around me, the other men fell to their knees, paralyzed by the sound. That's when the cliff wall began to glow. The spiral patterns lit up one by one, pulsing with the same blue light as the Thunderbird's eyes. The ground rumbled. Slowly, a doorway appeared in the rock. Not carved by humans, but by something much older. Inside, I saw steps leading down into darkness, covered in those same ancient symbols. The Thunderbird landed between me and the men. Its metal feathers scraped the ground, sending sparks everywhere. In my mind, I heard its voice again. "The old ones left this place in our care. Their power sleeps below. You alone can decide. Seal it forever or become its guardian." Mike's voice came through the radio. "Diana, police are on their way. Are you okay?" I looked at the paralyzed men, the ancient doorway, and the Thunderbird. Lightning danced between its feathers, reflecting in its storm cloud eyes. It was waiting for my choice. The pendant grew warm again, but gentle this time. Like a reminder, blood remembers. The old ones chose you. I took a step toward the doorway and made my decision. I stepped through the doorway. The stairs led down into a chamber that took my breath away. The walls glowed with the same blue light as the Thunderbird's eyes, showing paintings that seemed to move in the strange light. They told a story of the old ones, of the Thunderbird, of guardians chosen through time. In the center stood a pedestal made of the same metal as the Thunderbird's feathers. On it sat a small box covered in spiral patterns. "The old one's power," I whispered. The Thunderbird's voice filled my mind. Their knowledge. Their connection to the earth and sky. Too powerful for those who would use it wrongly. Behind me, I heard police sirens in the distance. The men above were still paralyzed, but that wouldn't last forever. I touched the box. Images flooded my mind. Ancient ceremonies, healing rituals, ways of speaking to the earth and sky. Knowledge that my people had protected for generations. Knowledge that could help people, or hurt them in the wrong hands. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Some things are meant to be protected, not used. I knew what I had to do. I picked up the box and carried it back up the stairs. The Thunderbird waited, its massive form blocking the night sky. The police lights were getting closer. "Seal it," I said. "But teach me to protect it." The Thunderbird's eyes flashed with what looked like approval. It spread its wings, and lightning struck the cliff wall. The doorway began to close, the glowing symbols fading one by one. I placed the box back inside just before the last opening disappeared. The rock sealed seamlessly, leaving no trace it had ever been there. The magnetic rocks lifted off the trucks and guns, floating through the air. They melted into the Thunderbird's feathers, becoming part of it again. The paralyzed men began to stir. Just then, police cars and park rangers arrived. Mike was with them, his eyes wide at the sight of the Thunderbird. The massive bird lifted off, its wings stirring up a wind that nearly knocked everyone down. But before it vanished into the storm clouds, it left one last message in my mind. You have chosen well. The Guardian's work is not to possess power, but to protect it. Watch, learn, I will teach you. The police arrested the men who couldn't stop babbling about giant birds and lightning. Their trucks were towed away, the drilling equipment confiscated. Mike helped me come up with a simple report that left out the more unusual details. A week later, I sat on my cabin's porch watching the sun set. The pendant still hung around my neck, warm and comforting. Mrs. Begay had helped me understand more about my new role. There were other sites to protect, other secrets to guard. Sometimes on my night patrols, I see the Thunderbird circling above the canyon. Sometimes it shows me things, ancient places hidden in the desert, forgotten stories in the rocks, the old ways of healing and helping. I'm still a park ranger, still give tours, help lost tourists, and check the trails. But now, I have another job too. The old blood runs strong in me, just like my grandmother said it would. And on stormy nights, when the tourists have gone and the desert is quiet, I walk to the North Canyon. The Thunderbird lands beside me, its metal feathers gleaming. The moonlight, together we guard the old one's secrets. Some people say the ancient stories aren't real, that there's no such thing as guardians or magical birds or old powers, but I know better, because every now and then someone comes to the canyon with maps and machines, thinking they'll find something valuable. They never do. All they find is, and if they don't listen when I warn them away, well, there's always the Thunderbird. The day I decided to skin myself alive was the day I finally understood what true horror meant. But I should start from the beginning, back when I thought the worst demons I had were the ones I brought home from Vietnam. My name is David Patterson. I'm a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains, and what I'm about to tell you happened in the summer of 1983. I was 45 then, with more gray in my hair than brown, and enough whiskey in my blood to make most men shake. But my hands were steady. They had to be. Tracking was my job. The mountains were in my blood. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she used to tell me stories about these forests when I was a kid. The old ones still walk here, she'd say, her dark eyes reflecting the campfire. I didn't believe her then. Sometimes I wish I still didn't. Most days I'd wake up in my cabin near the ranger station, drink my coffee black to chase away the hangover, and head out to patrol my section of the park. 20 years of tracking in these woods, and before that, tracking Charlie through Vietnam's jungles. I thought I knew every tree, every trail, every shadow these mountains could throw. But that spring, things started feeling wrong. It began when those university folks showed up with their permits and their fancy equipment, ready to dig up what they called an archaeological site. What they really meant was they were going to disturb an old Cherokee burial ground. I tried to warn them, even pulled out my grandmother's Cherokee blood as a reason. Some things, I told them, should stay buried. They just patted me on the back, called me superstitious, and showed me their government paperwork. That's when the nightmares started. Not the usual ones from Nam, these were different. I'd dream of trees crying real tears, of animals walking around with their insides on the outside, still somehow alive. I started drinking more, thinking it would help. It didn't. Then the symbols appeared. I found the first one early one morning. Strange marks carved deep into an old oak tree. They looked ancient, like the kind my grandmother would draw in the dirt when she thought no one was watching. But these weren't there the day before. I know because I'd walked past that same tree on my evening patrol. The local Cherokee elders came up to the station that same week. I remember old Joe standing bare, his face more wrinkled than a dried apple, speaking words that made my skin crawl. The seals are broken, David. They're broken, and what was bound is now free. I didn't want to believe him. 20 years in these mountains, and I'd seen some strange things. Bears acting weird before earthquakes, lights in the sky I couldn't explain, hikers who swore they'd walked in circles for days in clear weather. But nothing like what was coming. I remember taking a long pull from my flask that night, staring out my cabin window at the mountains. The moon was full, casting shadows that seemed to move even when the trees were still. Something in those shadows was watching me back. I could feel it. That was 3 months ago. Now I sit here, writing this down, my skin hidden under long sleeves and bandages, hoping someone will understand why we need to keep the barriers up, why some grounds should stay undisturbed, why some stories need to be told. Because the thing that came out of those disturbed graves, it's still out there, and it's waiting, and I'm the only one left who knows how to stop it. It started on a Tuesday morning in April. The archaeological team had set up their white tents near the old burial site, looking like mushrooms that had popped up overnight. I watched them from my usual spot, sipping coffee that had gone cold. Something felt off about the air, like that heavy feeling just before a storm hits, except there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Dr. Sarah Chen, the team leader, waved me over. She was smart, too smart to believe in ghost stories and old legends. "David, come see what we found." Her excitement made my stomach turn. These people didn't understand what they were messing with. I walked over, my boots crunching on dead leaves. They dug several neat squares in the earth, like someone had taken bites out of the ground. In one of the holes, something white gleamed in the dirt. Not just bones. These were different. They had markings on them, deep cuts that formed patterns. I recognized from my grandmother's stories. Aren't they fascinating? Dr. Chen pointed at the marks. We think they're ceremonial, some kind of ritual significance. I wanted to tell her those marks were warnings, not decorations. But before I could speak, a sound cut through the morning air. Like a scream, but not quite human. Everyone froze. Probably just a mountain lion, I said. But I knew better. In 20 years, I'd never heard a mountain lion make a sound like that. That evening I did my usual patrol. The sun was setting, painting the trees orange and red. I came across the first sign that something was really wrong. A perfect circle of dead grass, about 10 feet wide. In the center lay a deer, but something wasn't right about it. Its fur was on backward, like someone had pulled it off and put back on wrong. But it was still breathing. I radioed for the wildlife team, but when they arrived an hour later, the deer was gone. Only the dead grass remained. The next morning, I found Dr. Chen and her team speaking in a language I hadn't heard since I was a kid, sitting around their breakfast table. Ancient Cherokee words spilled from their mouths, but their eyes looked empty, like they were sleeping with their eyes open. When I touched Dr. Chen's shoulder, she jumped and asked what was wrong. None of them remembered speaking anything but English. That's when the trees started showing signs. Every morning I'd find new symbols carved into the bark, deep, fresh cuts that leaked sap like tears. These weren't made by any knife I knew. The cuts were too clean, too precise, and they showed up in places no human could reach, 30 feet, up smooth tree trunks. Old Joe, standing bare, came to visit me again. He didn't say much, just looked at the photos I'd taken of the symbols. His hands shook as he handed them back. "They should have listened to you, David," he said quietly. "The old ones, they had ways of punishing those who disturbed sacred ground, ways that are better left forgotten." That night, I broke my promise to stay sober. The whiskey didn't help. As I sat on my cabin porch, I watched the shadows between the trees grow longer, darker. They seemed to move against the wind, reaching toward the archaeological site like black fingers. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, the moon was high and something was standing at the edge of my yard. It looked like Dr. Chen, but wrong, like someone wearing her skin who didn't quite know how it should fit. When it smiled, its teeth were backwards. I blinked, and it was gone. But I could still hear it breathing, somewhere in the darkness. That's when I knew. The things my grandmother warned me about, the stories the elders told around the fire, they weren't just stories. The next morning, I found the first skinned animal, a rabbit, arranged carefully at the dig site entrance. Its skin lay beside it, turned inside out, formed into a perfect Cherokee symbol for welcome. The archaeological team was busy taking pictures of their latest find, a stone box covered in those same warning marks. They didn't even notice the rabbit, or maybe they couldn't see it. I'm still not sure which would be worse. I tried calling my supervisors, but how do you explain something like this? Sorry, boss, but I think we've got an ancient Cherokee spirit loose in the park, and it's leaving us welcome messages written in rabbit skin, so I kept quiet and watched. But I knew, we all knew somewhere deep down that something had woken up in these mountains. Something that had been sleeping for a very, very long time. And it was just getting started. The first time I saw time break, I was checking the trails near Bear Creek. It was a normal Thursday morning, or it should have been. I'd seen the same hiker 3 times that day wearing a bright red jacket. Nothing weird about that, except he was walking past me in different directions at the same time. Let me explain it better. I was standing on the ridge trail when I saw him walking north. Through my binoculars, I could see him about half a mile ahead. Then I heard footsteps behind me, and there he was again, walking south. Same guy, same red jacket, same blue backpack. Both of them were real, casting shadows, leaving footprints in the mud. I radioed the station. "Got a possible lost hiker," I said, not knowing how to explain what I was really seeing. That's when I spotted a third one, down in the valley, sitting on a rock eating a sandwich. My hands were shaking when I pulled out my flask, but I didn't drink. I needed to be clear-headed. 20 years of ranger work taught me one thing. When something doesn't make sense, you track it until it does. I followed the northbound hiker first. His tracks were normal for about a quarter mile, then they just stopped. Not like he turned around, they just ended, like he'd vanished into thin air. The southbound one's tracks did the same thing. When I got to the valley, the third one was gone too, but he'd left something behind, a half-eaten sandwich and a note. The note read, "Help me, I've been walking for 3 days, but the sun hasn't moved." That same day, I found the first real victim, one of Dr. Chen's students. Tommy, I think his name was. He was sitting in their lab tent, staring at a computer screen. Normal enough, except he was speaking in that ancient Cherokee again. When I touched his shoulder, his skin felt wrong, loose, like it wasn't attached right. "Time isn't right here anymore," he said in English, turning to look at me. "It's all happening at once, over and over." Then he smiled, and I saw his teeth were backwards, just like that thing that looked like Dr. Chen. I ran outside and threw up in the bushes. When I went back to check on him, Tommy was normal again. He didn't remember our conversation, but his laptop showed the same files being created and deleted, over and over. The timestamps all mixed up. The animals started acting strange, too. Birds flew backwards. Deer walked in perfect circles until they wore paths in the ground. I found a family of rabbits that kept dying and coming back to life. I watched it happen 3 times before I had to walk away. Old Joe visited me again that weekend. He brought his grandson, Little Creek, who was some kind of Cherokee medicine student. They sat at my kitchen table while I showed them my notes and photos. "The barrier is thin here now," Little Creek said, touching one of the photos. It showed a tree bleeding real blood when we cut it for a trail clearing. Time and space, and they're like a cloth. The diggers tore it when they opened the burial ground. Now everything's leaking through. "Leaking from where?" I asked. Old Joe's face got dark. "From the other side, where the punished ones live." He told me about the symbols we kept finding. They were part of an old punishment ritual. The Cherokee used it on the worst criminals, the ones who committed crimes so bad that death wasn't enough. The punishment turned them inside out. Not just their bodies, but their whole being. Sent them to a place where time ran backwards and space folded in on itself. But they were supposed to stay there, Little Creek said. The seals kept them trapped. Until we broke them, I finished. The archaeological team had dug up the stone box with the warning marks. They'd opened it yesterday. That night I couldn't sleep. The air felt thick, like trying to breathe underwater. My clock kept changing times. 3:15, 2:45, 4:30, 1:20, all within minutes. Outside my window, I saw shadows walking up the trees. Not cast on them, actually walking up them like the trees were roads. Around midnight, I heard a knock at my door. It was Dr. Chen again. The real one this time, I could tell. She was crying. "David," she said, "I saw myself today, in the lab. But it wasn't me. It was wearing me, like a coat." She held out her phone, showing me a photo. There she was, sitting at her desk. And behind her stood another her, grinning with backward teeth. I let her in and made coffee. While we sat there, the same cup of coffee got empty and full 7 times without either of us drinking it. Dr. Chen didn't even seem to notice anymore. "We found more bones today," she told me. "They're not normal. Some are turned inside out but still fresh. Some look 1,000 years old, but they're warm to the touch. And they're all marked with those symbols." I knew then that we were past the point of no return. The thing from the burial ground, the punishment spirit, it wasn't just haunting us. It was changing the rules of our world, making things wrong in ways they shouldn't be able to be wrong. And somewhere deep in the woods, I could hear it laughing. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through time itself. We were running out of time. Or maybe we had too much of it. Either way, I knew things were about to get much, much worse. The morning everything went really bad. I was doing my usual check on the archaeological team. The sun was rising, but something was wrong with it. It kept rising and setting every few minutes, like someone was flicking a light switch on and off. I found Mike, one of the archaeologists, standing outside his tent. He was wearing what I thought was a tan jacket. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a jacket at all. It was skin, human skin. His own skin turned inside out and worn like a coat. "It's warmer this way," he said, smiling at me with those backward teeth. "Want to try yours on like this?" And I'm not ashamed to admit it. 20 years in these mountains, 2 tours in Vietnam, and I ran like a scared kid. Behind me, I heard Mike laughing, but the laugh echoed from different directions like there were many of him. When I got back to my cabin, I found Dr. Chen waiting for me. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days. Maybe she hadn't. Time wasn't working right anymore, so who could tell? "They're all gone," she whispered. "The whole team. I found their clothes in their tents, but the clothes were wrong, turned inside out. But no blood, no signs of struggle, just empty clothes and sounds of laughing in the woods." I poured us both coffee. The liquid flowed up from the cup into the pot instead of the other way around. We pretended not to notice. "Tell me what happened," I said. She pulled out her research journal. The pages were filled with Cherokee symbols now, the same ones we kept finding on the trees. "It started after we opened that stone box," she said. "Inside was a skin, dried and old, but covered in these marks. According to the legends, it belonged to the first criminal they punished this way. And now it wants more skins," I finished. The coffee in my cup was boiling and freezing at the same time. That's when we heard the screaming from outside. We ran to the window. The archaeological site was on fire, but the flames were burning backward, turning from smoke back into fire, then into wood. And walking through the flames were things that looked like people, but moved all wrong, like puppets with too many joints. I grabbed my radio to call for help, but all that came through was that ancient Cherokee language, spoken in my own voice. Dr. Chen grabbed my arm. "Look," she pointed out the window. Multiple versions of Mike walked past, each wearing a different person's skin like a coat. Behind them came copies of the missing research team, all walking backward, all grinning with backward teeth. "They're coming for us," Dr. Chen said. But her voice came from behind me too. I turned around and there were 3 of her in the cabin. The one by the window, one sitting at my table drinking coffee, and one standing by my bedroom door. I couldn't tell which was real anymore. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran outside and headed for old Joe's place. The forest was wrong now. Trees grew upside down, their branches reaching into the earth. Animals walked past me wearing each other's skins. The air itself felt like it was turned inside out. Halfway there, I ran into myself. Another David Patterson wearing ranger clothes turned inside out, badge pinned directly into his skin. "It's not so bad," my other self said. "The spirit shows you things, how time really works, how skin is just another kind of clothing." I shot him. The bullet flew backward out of my gun, but it worked. The other me disappeared like smoke. But then I heard more footsteps. More versions of me were coming through the trees. Dozens of them. Some wearing their skin normally, some inside out, some wearing other people's skins. I climbed a tree. Or maybe the tree climbed me. It was hard to tell anymore. From up there, I could see the whole park. The wrongness was spreading like a stain. Hikers on distant trails were meeting themselves, turning into copies, wearing each other's skins. The punishment spirit wasn't just taking people, it was making more of itself, spreading like a disease through time and space. My radio crackled. Through the static, I heard old Joe's voice. "The cave, David. Bring the original skin from the gear. Stone box. There's only one way to stop this." I looked down. The other versions of me were circling the tree like hungry wolves. Some were climbing up, moving like spiders. Their faces split open in grins that went all the way around their heads. Had to get back to the dig site. Had to find that stone box. Had to get to the cave old Joe mentioned. But most of all, I had to keep my own skin on my body where it belonged. At least for now. Because deep down I was starting to understand what the punishment spirit really wanted. It wasn't just about wearing skins or making copies. It was about turning the whole world inside out, making everything as wrong as it was. And I was the only one left who could stop it. Me and whatever was left of my sanity. I checked my watch. The hands spun backward, then forward, then melted. Time was running out, or maybe it was running in. Either way, I had to move. I took a deep breath and climbed down, up, the tree. The copies of me smiled wider, their teeth gleaming backward in their heads. "Come on then," I whispered. "Let's see who the real David Patterson is." Behind me, the sun rose and set 12 times in a minute. Somewhere in the woods, I heard Dr. Chen screaming in 3 different places at once. And ahead of me, through the twisted trees and backward time, lay the archaeological site and the stone box that started it all. I just hoped I had enough of myself left to finish this. I found old Joe's cabin just as the sun was setting for the 20th time that hour. He was sitting on his porch smoking his pipe, while 3 different versions of birds sang the same song backward in his yard. "I've been waiting for you, David," he said. "You and you and you." He pointed to my left and right, and I realized, with a chill, that 2 other versions of me had arrived at the same time. But they disappeared like smoke when old Joe waved his pipe at them. "How did you do that?" I asked, climbing the porch steps carefully. Each step creaked before my foot touched it. "Sit down, son. It's time you learned about your grandmother, about our family's promise." He looked older than I'd ever seen him, like he'd aged 100 years since yesterday. Maybe he had. I sat in the rocking chair that moved on its own, back and forth, out of time with everything else. Old Joe pulled something from his pocket, a small leather pouch that seemed to breathe. "Your grandmother wasn't just any Cherokee," he said. "She was a keeper. Her job was to watch the seals, make sure things like this spirit stayed trapped where they belonged." He opened the pouch and pulled out a piece of dried skin covered in familiar symbols. This was her seal skin. Every keeper had one. My hands shook as I took it. The skin was warm, like it had just been taken off someone. Why didn't she ever tell me? She tried, David. All those stories she told you about the old ones, about respecting the buried places. Those weren't just stories. She was training you. But then the drinking started after Vietnam. He looked at me sadly. You stopped listening. Shame hit me hard. I remembered all those times grandmother tried to teach me the old words, show me the symbols. I'd brushed her off, too busy drowning my war memories in whiskey. The spirit that's loose now, old Joe continued. It's not just any punishment spirit. It's the first one, the strongest one. The one your grandmother's grandmother helped trap hundreds of years ago. He stood up and walked to the porch rail. Outside, the trees were growing and dying over and over, like someone was playing a film forward and backward. Our family made a promise back then, he said. If it ever got loose, one of us would have to trap it again. That's why it's making copies of you, David. It knows you're a keeper's grandson. It's trying to find the version of you that's weakest, the one it can break. My head spun. But I don't know how to trap it. I don't know the old ways. Old Joe turned to me and suddenly he looked young again, just for a moment. Your body remembers, even if your mind forgot. Your grandmother's blood runs in your veins. That's why you can still see what's real and what spirit made. That's why you haven't lost your skin yet. He reached into his shirt and pulled out an old photo. It showed my grandmother standing in front of a cave, wearing a deerskin coat covered in symbols. This is where it has to happen. The same cave, where they trapped it the first time. But David, his voice got heavy. There's a price. What kind of price? To trap a skinwalker, you have to give up your own skin. Willingly. Turn yourself inside out while keeping your mind. Only a keeper's blood can do it and survive. I felt sick. The whiskey I'd been fighting all day suddenly sounded real good. But then I remembered Dr. Chen's face as her copies chased her through the woods. I thought of Mike wearing his own skin, like a coat, trying to spread the wrongness to others. Your grandmother knew this day might come, old Joe said softly. She prepared something for you. Left it in my keeping. He went inside and came back with a box made of old wood. Inside was a knife carved from bone, its handle wrapped in skin covered with Cherokee symbols. This was her ceremonial blade, he said. The symbols will protect your mind when it happens. But David, you have to be sure. Once you start the ceremony, there's no turning back, and it will hurt more than anything you've ever felt. I took the knife. It felt warm in my hand, like it recognized me. Outside, I could hear my other selves walking through the woods, calling my name with backward voices. How long do I have? I asked. Old Joe looked at the sun, which was now rolling across the sky like a marble. The spirit's power grows stronger as it makes more copies. By midnight, there won't be enough real world left to trap it in. He gripped my shoulder. You're the last keeper, David, the last one with the blood. I stood up, putting the knife in my belt. Tell me everything I need to know, and Joe? I pulled out my flask and handed it to him. Keep this. Whether I live or die, I'm done running from myself. The old man smiled, and for a second I saw my grandmother's face in his. Then let's begin. First, you need to know the true name of the spirit. The name your grandmother's grandmother gave it when she turned it inside out the first time. Outside, the woods grew quiet. Even the backward birds stopped singing. They knew what was coming. A keeper was taking up the old ways again. And this time I wouldn't forget who I was. The walk back to the archaeological site was like moving through a nightmare. Every step I took, I saw another version of myself walking alongside me. Some wore their ranger uniforms normally. Others had them turned inside out. A few wore other people's skins like suits. I gripped my grandmother's knife tighter. Its warmth the only real thing left in this twisted world. You can't stop it, one of my copies said, walking backward next to me. Why not join us? It doesn't hurt after a while. I ignored it, focusing on what old Joe had taught me. The spirit's true name burned in my mind. Uktana Skinwalker. The first criminal the Cherokee ever punished this way. Now I understood why the punishment was so terrible. They hadn't just turned him inside out. They'd turned his whole being wrong. The archaeological site came into view, but it wasn't right anymore. The tents kept appearing and disappearing, like the world was blinking. Inside them, I saw the same horrible scene playing over and over. The team opening the stone box, finding the first skin. The spirit reaching out through time to grab them. Dr. Chen stood in the middle of the camp. All 12 versions of her. David? They all said at once. Which one of you is real? The one who's still right side out, I said, showing her my grandmother's knife. The fake Dr. Chen's hissed and backed, away, their skin rippling like water. The real Dr. Chen ran to me crying. They keep pulling me apart, she said, making more of me. I can feel myself stretching across time. I know how to stop it, I told her. But I need the original skin from the box, the one you found. She pointed to the main tent, which was now upside down, its ropes reaching up into the sky. It's in there. But David, the spirit knows you're coming. It's been waiting. I looked around. More copies of me were gathering, forming a circle. Among them were things that looked like my grandmother, wearing her skin wrong, trying to trick me. The sight made my blood boil. Get to old Joe's cabin, I told Dr. Chen. He can protect you. But go. I pushed her toward the trail. As she ran, I saw multiple versions of her running too, some forward, some backward, but I knew the real one would make it. She had to. I walked into the upside-down tent. Gravity shifted, and suddenly I was standing on the ceiling looking up, at the floor. The stone box sat on a table that was now above my head, or below it. Nothing made sense anymore. Inside the box, the original skin waited. It was dry and ancient, covered in warning symbols. When I touched it, images flashed through my mind. The first punishment ceremony, hundreds of years ago. My grandmother's grandmother speaking the spirit's true name. The criminals scream as they turned him inside out and sealed him away. You know, have her blood, a voice said behind me. I turned to see myself, but wrong. This version of me wore skins from all the missing people stitched together like a quilt. We can smell it, the power of the keepers. More copies of me emerged from the tent walls. Some crawled like spiders, others floated. All of them wore skins wrong. She should have trained you better, the spirit said through their mouths. Should have prepared you. Now look, time is breaking, space is folding. Soon there won't be any right way to wear a skin. I clutched the original skin in one hand, my grandmother's knife in the other. The copies moved closer. Join us willingly, they said. Don't make us take your skin by force. That's when I saw it. In a corner of the tent, reality itself was peeling back like old wallpaper. Behind it was something I can't describe, a place where everything was inside out, the spirit's home dimension, leaking into ours. I had to get to the cave, had to complete the ceremony before midnight, before the whole world turned inside out. But first, I had to get through myself. Dozens of copies of David Patterson, all wanting my skin, all serving the spirit that was turning everything wrong. I held up the knife. The symbols on it glowed with the same light I remembered from my grandmother's campfire stories. My name is David Patterson, I said, remembering the words old Joe taught me. Grandson of Sarah Whitecloud, keeper of the seals. And I'm the only me there needs to be. The copies screamed, not with my voice, but with the spirit's true voice. They rushed at me all at once, their backward teeth gleaming, their wrong skins flapping. I clutched the knife, spoke the first words of the ceremony, and got ready to fight my way through myself. Behind me, through the tear in reality, I could hear the cave calling. It wasn't far now, but first I had to face every twisted version of myself that the spirit could create. And time was running out, if time even existed anymore in this broken world. I fought my way through the twisted versions of myself, using my grandmother's knife. Each time the blade touched one of my copies, they vanished like smoke. But more kept coming. The woods around me bent and twisted, trees growing upside down and inside out. The cave entrance appeared ahead, or maybe I appeared in front of it. Time wasn't working right anymore. The mouth of the cave looked like a screaming face, dripping with a darkness that moved wrong. Last chance, keeper, the spirit spoke through 100 versions of my voice. Join us willingly. Wear your skin the free way. Instead of answering, I started speaking the Cherokee words old Joe had taught me. My grandmother's knife glowed brighter with each word. The copies of me screamed and backed away from the light. Inside the cave, the air felt thick, like breathing. Soup. The walls were covered in ancient symbols that moved when I looked at them. In the center was a circle of stones, each one turned inside out somehow, showing their insides on the outside. I stepped into the circle, holding the original skin. From the box in one hand and my grandmother's knife in the other, the spirit's copies couldn't enter. The old magic in the stones kept them out. "You don't know what you're doing," they howled. "You're not trained. You'll turn the whole world inside out." But I did know. My body remembered just like old Joe said it would. My grandmother's blood knew the words, knew the movements. I placed the original skin in the center of the circle and began the ceremony. The air crackled with power. Outside the circle, reality itself was coming apart. Trees turned into sky, rocks became air, and all my copies started melting together into something huge and horrible. That's when I saw it, the spirit's true form. It was like a person turned inside out 1,000 times, wearing every skin it had ever stolen. And it was angry. It reached for me with hands made of stolen skin, but couldn't cross the stone circle. I kept speaking the ancient words, even as the cave turned upside down around us. Then came the hard part. I took my grandmother's knife and started cutting, turning my own skin inside out while keeping my mind focused on the ceremony. The pain was worse than anything I'd felt in Vietnam, worse than all my years of drinking, worse than every nightmare combined. But I kept going. Blood ran up the cave walls. The spirit screamed with 1,000 stolen voices. Reality buckled and bent around us. "I name you," I shouted in Cherokee, my voice echoing through time itself. "I name you and I trap you." The spirit's true name burned in the air like fire. It tried to run, but the ceremony caught it, started pulling it in. All the stolen skins it wore began to tear away. With the last of my strength, I finished turning my skin inside out. The spirit howled as the ceremony took hold. I felt it being drawn into me, felt my inside-out skin becoming its new prison. Everything went white, then black, then inside out. When I opened my eyes, the cave was normal again. The copies were gone. Through the entrance, I could see the sun rising. Just once, just like it should. I stood up carefully. My skin burned like fire, turned inside out but somehow still working. In a puddle on the cave floor, I saw my reflection. I looked wrong now, like someone had rebuilt me backward. But my eyes were still mine. The spirit was trapped inside my own turned skin. I could feel it scratching around in there. But the ceremony held it tight, just like my grandmother's grandmother did hundreds of years ago. Epilogue. That was 2 months ago. I live on the Cherokee Reservation now, in a small cabin next to old Joe. Dr. Chen visits sometimes, bringing me news from the park. They found all the missing people, alive but changed. No one talks about what happened. I stay covered head to toe even in summer. The sight of my inside-out skin scares people, and the spirit still whispers sometimes, trying to get out. But the ceremony holds. Every full moon I check the seals, make sure they're strong. Sometimes I feel other things out there, watching from the places where reality runs thin. But they keep their distance now. They know what I am, what I became to stop them. I am the keeper, the last of my grandmother's line. And as long as I wear this skin inside out, the spirit stays trapped. But sometimes on quiet nights, I hear it, laughing. And I wonder, did I trap it or did it trap me? I've spent 23 years as a park ranger in Alaska, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened last winter. My name is Richard Kovach, and I'm about to tell you why I still wake up some nights, checking if parts of my body have frozen in time. It started with the cracks. Wrong cracks. I know how crazy that sounds, but when you've worked with glaciers as long as I have, you know how they're supposed to move. These weren't moving right. That morning in early December, I was doing my usual patrol along the Kenai fjords, checking the ice formations. The sun hadn't fully risen. It rarely does during Alaskan winters. leaving everything in a blue-gray twilight that made the glacier look like rippling glass. Something's different, I muttered to myself, my breath creating little clouds in the freezing air. The cracks in the ice were moving sideways instead of forward. In my entire career studying glaciers, first as an Arctic researcher, and now as a park ranger, I'd never seen anything like it. Maybe I was extra sensitive to unusual ice patterns because of what happened 5 years ago. I try not to think about that day. The day I lost my entire research team in what the official reports called an unexplained glacial incident. We were studying ice core samples when the glacier just shifted. Not the way glaciers normally move, but like a living thing. 3 good people, 3 friends, gone in seconds. Their bodies were never found. My radio crackled, pulling me from those dark memories. "Kovacs, you there?" It was Sarah, one of our newer rangers. "Go ahead. We've got some Inuit elders at the visitor center. They're pretty worked up about something. Say they need to talk to you specifically." I frowned. The local Inuit elders rarely came to the park unless something was seriously wrong. "I'll be there in 20. When I arrived, I found 3 elders I knew well, Aklak, Kanti, and Malik. Their faces were grave, and Aklak, the oldest among them, grabbed my arm as soon as I walked in. "The ice speaks again," he said. His weathered face creased with worry. "Those who walk below are awakening." I'd heard hints of these legends before, but never from the elders themselves. They were usually tight-lipped about their ancient stories. But now something had scared them enough to break their silence. "Tell me more," I said, sitting down with them. Kanti leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our ancestors spoke of creatures in the deep ice. They weave time like we weave baskets, freeze moments like we freeze fish. They collect these moments, these pieces of time. And now," she glanced at the window toward the glacier, "now they hunger again." I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but the memory of those wrong cracks in the ice kept nagging at me. And then Malik said something that made my blood run cold. "Have you seen the lights beneath the ice yet, Ranger Kovacs? The blue-green ones that move like northern lights but under your feet?" My hand started shaking. Just yesterday, I'd spotted something exactly like that, but I'd convinced myself it was just sunlight playing tricks through the ice layers. Before I could respond, my radio burst to life. "Kovacs!" It was Sarah again, but this time her voice was shaking. "We've got a situation at the North Ridge. You need to see this." "What kind of situation?" There was a long pause before she answered. "We found someone in the ice, but it's impossible. They're frozen solid, but their eyes are moving." The elders exchanged knowing looks. Aklak squeezed my arm harder and said something I'll never forget. "It has begun. The Time Weavers are no longer content to just watch. They're hunting again." I grabbed my gear and headed. Soon at the elders' warnings echoing in my head. What I was about to find would prove that sometimes the oldest and strangest stories carry the most terrible truths. The drive to North Ridge was the longest 15 minutes of my life. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, and every few seconds I caught myself glancing at the glacier walls rising on both sides of the road. In the dim winter light, they looked different somehow, more alive. Sarah was waiting for me at the base of the ridge, her face pale. "This way," she said, pointing to a narrow path that led up toward a small ice cave. "Jake is still up there with the person we found." As we climbed, I noticed something odd. The air got colder, not the usual kind of cold, but a strange, biting chill that seemed to sink right into my bones. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We were doing routine checks when Jake spotted something weird in the ice," Sarah explained, her breath coming out in quick, nervous puffs. "At first, we thought it was just trash frozen in there, maybe an old jacket. But then," she stopped walking and turned to face me. "Then we saw it was a man. And Richard, he's perfectly preserved like he was frozen yesterday. But that's not even the weird part." We reached the cave entrance where Jake stood waiting. His usual joking smile was gone. Without saying a word, he pointed his flashlight at the ice wall. I'll never forget what I saw. About 6 feet into the clear ice was a man in hiking clothes, probably in his 30s. His body was frozen in mid-step, 1 foot forward like he was walking through the ice itself. But what made my stomach turn was his eyes. They were moving, following our flashlight beams. That's not possible, I whispered, even though I was seeing it with my own eyes. I stepped closer, placing my hand on the ice. It was smooth, solid. No signs of melting or air pockets. Then something happened that made all 3 of us jump back. A soft, blue-green light pulsed through the ice behind the frozen man, just like the lights the elders had mentioned. It moved like underwater waves disappearing deeper into the glacier. "Please tell me you saw that," Jake said, his voice shaking. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then I remembered something from my research days. We needed to document everything. "Get the cameras," I ordered. "Take photos from every angle. And I want temperature readings of the ice around him." As Sarah and Jake worked, I noticed more strange things. The ice around the man was different. It had a pattern I'd never seen before, like countless tiny snowflakes arranged in spirals. And when I checked my compass, the needle went crazy, spinning in circles. We were so focused on the frozen man that we almost missed the sounds. Soft cracking noises like someone walking on thin ice, but coming from inside the glacier walls. And was it my imagination, or were the blue-green lights getting brighter? "Look!" Sarah suddenly grabbed my arm. "His hand! It moved!" We all stared in horror as the man's fingers slowly curled into a fist, despite being completely encased in solid ice. Then his head turned, just slightly, but enough to look directly at us. His eyes were filled with terror, and his lips moved like he was trying to say something. That's when my radio crackled to life, making us all jump. Through bursts of static, I heard one of our patrol units. "Base, reports of lights under ice. 2 more people found. Jackson Glacier section." I felt the blood drain from my face. The elders' warnings echoed in my head. "They're hunting again." "We need to get back to base," I said, trying to keep my voice calm for Sarah and Jake's sake. "And we need to call in help. Real help." As we hurried back down the ridge, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The strange lights seemed to follow us through the glacier walls, always just at the edge of our vision. And the cracking sounds. They were getting closer. What we didn't know then was that we'd just stumbled onto the edge of something much bigger and much older than any of us could have imagined. The frozen man was just the beginning. A sign that the ice weavers were done hiding. They were ready to show themselves, and we were about to learn exactly why the Inuit elders had been so afraid. Back at base, things were chaos. 4 more people had been found frozen in the ice across different parts of the park. Park officials had closed off all hiking trails, but we still had 3 groups of tourists unaccounted for. I gathered my team in the main office, trying to make sense of what was happening. "The patterns are all the same," I said, spreading out the photos we'd taken. "Every victim is perfectly preserved in the ice, and they're all still conscious." The words felt wrong coming out of my mouth, like something from a nightmare. Sarah pointed to one of the photos. "And look at how they're positioned. This woman was found halfway up a vertical ice wall, like she was climbing. But there's no climbing gear, no marks in the ice. It's like she just appeared there." That's when we heard it. A sound like wind chimes made of ice coming from right outside our window. We all turned to look. What we saw changed everything we thought we knew about our world. The air itself seemed to freeze in patches, creating what looked like floating mirrors made of ice. Through these ice mirrors, something moved. At first, I thought they were just reflections, but then I saw them clearly. Creatures made of living crystal, their bodies shifting and flowing like liquid glass. "Nobody move," I whispered, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. One of the creatures glided through the window, right through the solid glass, as if it wasn't even there. Up close, it looked almost human-shaped, but its body was transparent like the purest ice, with swirling patterns of blue and green light inside it. Where its eyes should have been, there were two glowing points of white light. Jake, who was closest to the door, tried to make a run for it. That was when we saw what these things could do. The creature raised what might have been its hand, and suddenly Jake just stopped. Not like he chose to stop running. He was frozen in mid-stride, 1 foot in the air. Around him, a small bubble of space turned crystalline, like everything inside it had turned to ice, including the air itself. "Oh, God," Sarah breathed. "The other victims? Is this what happened to them?" The creature turned its head toward her, and I swear I saw curiosity in those points of light. It moved closer to Jake, studying him like he was an interesting bug in a jar. Then it did something that made my skin crawl. It reached into the frozen bubble and touched Jake's face, leaving trails of frost that formed intricate spiral patterns. I remembered what the Inuit elders had said about these beings, the ice weavers. They weren't just freezing people. They were collecting moments in time, preserving them like insects in amber. But why? My radio crackled again, making the creature turn sharply. Through the static, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Base. Massive ice formation. Under old research station. Some kind of structure. The ice weaver's lights pulsed brighter at the mention of the research station. The same place where I'd lost my team 5 years ago. That's when I realized what happened to my research team wasn't an accident. It was these things. They'd taken them just like they were taking people now. The creature moved toward me, its crystalline body making that chiming sound. Behind it, through the ice mirror still floating in the air, I saw more of its kind emerging from the glacier walls. They were all heading in the same direction, toward the old research station. "They're showing us," I said slowly, understanding hitting me like a punch to the gut. "They want us to see something." The ice weaver nodded, actually nodded, and gestured toward the window. Outside, the strange lights under the ice were forming a path, leading up toward the research station. They were inviting us to follow. Looked at Sarah, then at Jake's frozen form, then back at the creature. "If we come with you," I said, not even sure if it could understand me, "will you let him go?" The creature tilted its head, those white points of light flickering. Then slowly, the crystalline bubble around Jake began to melt. He fell forward, gasping, as time returned to normal around him. What are they?" he choked out. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I think we're about to find out." I helped Jake to his feet and turned to my team. "Whatever's up there at the research station, it's the key to all of this. These things, they've been here all along, watching, studying us, and now they want to show us something." Sarah gripped her flashlight tighter. "What if it's a trap?" "Maybe it is," I said, watching as more ice weavers emerged from the glacier. "But I lost my research team up there 5 years ago. If there's any chance of finding out what happened to them." I let the sentence hang. The ice weaver by the window made that chiming sound again, almost like it was getting impatient. Outside, the lights under the ice grew brighter, creating an eerie blue-green pathway up the glacier. "We need to document everything," I said, grabbing my camera and notebook. "Whatever we find up there, the world needs to know about it." As we stepped outside into the freezing air, following our crystalline guide, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something much bigger than just a mystery about missing people. The ice weavers had been hiding in this glacier for who knows how long, and now they were finally ready to reveal their secrets. What we would find at the old research station would answer questions I'd been asking for 5 years, but it would also make me wish I'd never asked them in the first place. The climb to the old research station was like walking through a dream. Our ice weaver guide floated ahead of us, its crystalline body giving off just enough light to see by. More of them lined our path, standing still as statues in the glacier. Walls. Their glowing eyes followed our every move. "Look at the ice," Sarah whispered, pointing her flashlight at the ground. The beam revealed layers upon layers of strange patterns, like frozen ripples in a pond. "It's different here." She was right. The deeper we went into the glacier, the more unusual the ice became. It wasn't just frozen water anymore. It was more like a giant crystal, with swirling designs that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. Then we saw it. The research station had completely changed. 5 years ago it was just a small building dug into the ice. Now the ice had shaped itself around it, forming a massive doorway that led deep into the glacier. The entrance was decorated with spiraling patterns of frost, just like the ones we'd seen on the frozen victims. "This is new," I said, running my hand along the icy wall. "All of this, it wasn't here before." Our Ice Weaver guide made its chiming sound and gestured for us to follow. Jake hesitated. Maybe we should wait for backup, but I was already walking forward. I had to know what happened to my old team. The tunnel led us down, down, down into the heart of the glacier. The walls changed. From white ice to something clearer, like glass, and behind them, we started seeing things. Impossible things. "Oh my God," Sarah gasped, shining her light through one of the walls. "Richard, are those buildings?" They were. Trapped in the ice were the remains of an entire city, but not like any city I'd ever seen. The buildings were made of some kind of crystal, similar to the Ice Weavers themselves. They spiraled up into the ice like frozen flowers, each one perfectly preserved. "It's some kind of ancient civilization," I breathed, taking pictures, with shaking hands. "They've been here all along, frozen in the ice, but that wasn't the strangest part. As we walked deeper into this frozen city, we saw more bubbles of stopped time, like the one they'd put Jake in. Except these were huge, containing entire streets and buildings, and inside them, the people," Jake pointed, his voice barely a whisper. "Look at the people." In each frozen bubble, we could see figures going about their daily lives. Some were walking, others seemed to be talking to each other, and a few were even caught mid-laugh. But they weren't human. They were like the Ice Weavers, beings made of living crystal. Our guide led us to what looked like the center of the city. There, in the biggest time bubble of all, stood a massive structure that looked like a clock. Tower made of ice. But instead of numbers, it had swirling patterns of light that moved in strange ways. The Ice Weaver touched the bubble, and suddenly the air filled with that chiming sound. But this time, it formed words in my head. "Time slips away," the voice chimed. "We catch it, keep it, save it." "Save it from what?" I asked. The creature's lights pulsed sadly. "The warmth comes, ice melts, time flows too fast, we must preserve." That's when I understood. These weren't just random attacks. The Ice Weavers were trying to save pieces of time itself. As the glaciers melted, they were losing their home, their preserved moments of history. They were desperate to catch and keep whatever memories they could. But then I saw something that made my heart stop. In one of the smaller time bubbles near the tower, I saw them, my research team from 5 years ago. They were frozen mid-stride, their faces showing surprise but not fear. They'd been here all along, becoming part of this vast collection of frozen moments. Can you let them go?" I asked our guide. The Ice Weaver's lights dimmed. "Time stored too long cannot flow again. They are part of the pattern now." Sarah grabbed my arm. "Richard," she said urgently. "The ice around us. It's changing." She was right. The clear walls were starting to fill with those swirling patterns, and more Ice Weavers were appearing all around us. The air was getting colder, and I could see our breath starting to crystallize in front of our faces. "They're going to freeze us too," Jake realized, backing away. "We've seen too much." I looked at our guide, hoping to see some sign of mercy in those glowing eyes. "Please," I said, "we can help you. There must be another way." The creature tilted, its head considering. But before it could respond, a deep cracking sound echoed through the frozen city. The Ice Weavers all turned at once, their lights pulsing with what looked like fear. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And we were trapped in the middle of it, deep inside a glacier that was quickly becoming a maze of frozen time. The cracking sound grew louder, and now I could feel the whole glacier trembling. Our Ice Weaver guide's lights started flashing rapidly, like a warning beacon. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, struggling to keep her balance as the ice shook. The answer came in a sudden rush of water. A stream of seawater had found its way into the frozen city through a crack in the glacier. Where the salt water touched, the ice weavers' careful time bubbles began to pop like soap bubbles, releasing their frozen moments back into normal time. "The ice is breaking up," I shouted over the noise. "The whole glacier is starting to break apart." The ice weavers were panicking now. They zipped through the walls in all directions, trying to save their precious frozen memories. Our guide made that chiming sound again, more urgent this time. "Run, surface, now." We didn't need to be told twice, but getting out wasn't going to be easy. The once clear passages were now a maze of shifting ice and broken time bubbles. Everywhere we turned, moments from different times were spilling into each other. "This way," I called out, pointing to a passage that looked more stable. But as we ran toward it, the ice in front of us suddenly crystallized. 2 ice weavers emerged, their lights pulsing angry red. "Back, go back!" Jake yelled. But behind us, more ice weavers appeared. They were no longer the curious creatures from before. Now they looked desperate and dangerous. "They think we caused this," Sarah realized, pressing her back against the ice wall. "They think we brought the salt water in." She was right. The ice weavers were closing in, their powers turning the air around us crystal clear and cold. I could feel time starting to slow down around my feet, ice creeping up my boots. That's when I remembered something. The compass. Earlier it had gone crazy around their time bubbles. I pulled it out of my pocket and held it up. Just as I'd hoped, the needle spun wildly, and the ice weavers backed away slightly, their lights flickering in confusion. "The magnetic field," I shouted. "It disrupts their powers. Everyone, get your phones out, anything with a magnet." As we held up our devices, the ice weavers retreated just enough to create a path. We ran for it, slipping and sliding on the increasingly wet ice. Behind us I could hear the horrible sound of their ancient city collapsing. Thousands of years of preserved memories dissolving in the salt water. But we weren't safe yet. The ice weavers were still chasing us, and now the glacier itself was becoming a death trap. Huge chunks of ice fell from above as the structure weakened. Worse, random bubbles of stopped time floated through the air like invisible traps. We had to watch every step. "There!" Jake pointed to a faint light above. "I can see the surface." We were almost there when it happened. Sarah screamed, and I turned to see her leg caught in a time bubble. She was stuck, half her body frozen in a moment that wasn't moving. "Help me!" she cried, trying to pull free. But touching a time bubble was dangerous. We could end up frozen, too. The ice weavers were getting closer. I could feel the air getting colder again. We had seconds to make a decision. I looked at my old research team, still frozen in their bubble nearby, preserved forever in the ice. I couldn't let that happen to Sarah. Not again. Not to another friend. Pulling off my jacket, I wrapped it around my hands. "Jake, when I get her free, run for the surface. Don't stop, no matter what happens." "What are you gonna do?" he asked, eyes wide with fear. I took a deep breath, watching the ice weavers close in. Something really stupid. With my jacket-wrapped hands, I grabbed the edge of the time bubble around Sarah's leg. The cold hit me instantly, like thousands of ice needles stabbing into my skin. But I could feel something else, too. The strange, swirling energy of stopped time. "When I say now," I told Sarah, "pull as hard as you can." The ice weavers were only feet away now, their crystal bodies glowing bright with anger. Above us, the northern lights had started to shine through the cracking glacier, painting everything in waves of green and purple. That's when I had an idea. "Jake!" I shouted. "The salt water! Direct it towards them!" He understood immediately. Using his backpack, Jake started splashing the incoming salt water toward the ice weavers. They retreated from it like cats from a spray bottle, their lights flickering in fear. "Now, Sarah, pull!" She yanked her leg hard while I pulled on the time bubble. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like breaking glass, the bubble shattered. Sarah fell forward, free but shivering badly. "Run!" I helped her up, and we made a final dash for the surface. The ice weavers shrieked behind us, their chiming voices now sounding like breaking icicles. We were almost out when I felt it, that horrible cold creeping up my legs. I looked down to see ice crystals spreading up my boots, faster than ever. Before, the ice weavers had caught up and they were determined not to let me escape. "Keep going," I shouted to Jake and Sarah. "Get to the surface. We're not leaving you." Sarah tried to come back, but I waved her away. "Trust me." The ice was up to my knees now. The ice weavers surrounded me, their bodies glowing brighter than ever in the light of the aurora borealis. But they'd made one big mistake. They'd backed me up right next to the largest crack in the glacier wall, the one that was letting in all the salt water. "You want to preserve time?" I said to them, reaching behind me to grab the ice wall. "Then remember this moment." With every bit of strength I had left, I slammed my other fist into the crack. The ice, already weak, split open like a broken window. Salt water poured in, hitting the ice weavers in a wave. Their crystalline bodies started to melt and distort, their careful time bubbles bursting all around us. I felt the ice on my legs crack and break away. The whole chamber was flooding now. The ice weavers made one last attempt to grab me, but the salt water had weakened them too much. Their bodies were dissolving, turning into nothing more than cold mist in the air. "Richard!" Sarah and Jake had come back. They grabbed my arms and pulled me toward the surface as the entire ice chamber began to collapse behind us. We made it out just as the sun was rising. Standing at a safe distance, we watched as that section of the glacier crumbled in on itself, taking the ancient frozen city with it. The ice weavers and all their collected moments of time were gone, but not completely gone, as it turned out. Ever since that day, parts of my body occasionally freeze in time. Sometimes it's just a finger that stops moving for a few minutes. Other times, my whole arm gets stuck in place for an hour. The doctors can't explain it, of course. How could they? But I know what it is. Little fragments of the ice weaver's power, still trapped inside me from when I touched their time bubbles. Sarah and Jake have it too, though not as bad. We don't talk about what happened much. Who would believe us? The official report says it was just a normal glacier collapse. The frozen people we found were all rescued, though none of them remember anything about being trapped in the ice. My old research team's bodies were never found. I like to think that maybe, somewhere in the deepest part of the glacier where the salt water couldn't reach, there's still a bubble of stopped time with them inside it, still preserved, still perfect, in a single frozen moment that will last forever. Sometimes, on cold nights when the northern lights are dancing, I go back to what's left of that glacier. The ice has changed. It's normal ice now, just frozen water with no strange patterns or mysterious lights. But if I press my hand against it and wait, I swear I can still feel it pulse, just slightly, like a heartbeat made of frost. And sometimes, if I listen very carefully, I can hear a faint chiming sound, like crystal wind chimes in a breeze. That's when I know they're still out there, somewhere deep in the ice, weaving their patterns in time, waiting, watching, and maybe, just maybe, learning that not every moment needs to be preserved in ice to be worth remembering. The end. I never wanted to write this down, but people need to know the truth about what happened in White Mountain. My name is William Morrison, and I've been a park ranger here for 23 years. What I'm about to tell you isn't just another campfire story. It's a warning. It started 3 days ago during what should have been a routine rescue. A teenage boy had wandered off the main trail, and his parents called it in just before sunset. Nothing unusual there. I'd done hundreds of these rescues before, but this one was different. This one brought back memories I'd spent 15 years trying to forget. The fog that evening wasn't normal. I knew that the moment I stepped out of my truck. Most fog moves like water, floating and drifting with the wind. But this fog moved like it was alive. It twisted into shapes I'd never seen before, making patterns that looked almost like writing on the air. It reminded me of that terrible day I lost Sarah and little Jenny. "Focus, Bill," I muttered to myself, adjusting my flashlight. The beam cut through the mist, but something was wrong with the way the light bounced back. Instead of the usual soft glow, the fog seemed to eat the light, creating dark spots where there should have been brightness. I checked my radio one more time. Base, this is Morrison. I'm starting the search for Marker 23. Over. Copy that, Morrison. Be careful out there. Weather's acting weird. Over. They had no idea how weird things were about to get. The first sign came when I found the boy's backpack. It was halfway stuck in a boulder, not lying against it, not wedged into a crack, but literally fused into the rock like they'd melted. Together, I'd seen a lot of strange things in these mountains, but nothing like this. My hands shook as I touched the part of the bag that was still normal. It was still warm. That's when I heard the screaming. It wasn't the panicked yell of a lost kid. This was different, a sound no human throat should be able to make. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the mountains until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. And the fog. The fog started moving toward the sound. I've been running toward danger my whole career. It's what we do in mountain rescue. But as I followed that scream, my feet got heavier with each step. Every instinct told me to turn back, to radio for backup, to wait until morning. But all I could think about was how no one came to help my family 15 years ago, when the fog took them. The beam of my flashlight caught something ahead, a shape in the mist that looked almost human. For a second, just a split second, it turned to face me. That's when I realized what had been bothering me about the fog all along. It wasn't just moving wrong. It was watching me. And somewhere in these mountains, a lost boy was screaming for help just like my Jenny did all those years ago. This time, things would be different. This time, I wouldn't let the fog win. I just didn't know then that I was. Already too late. I followed the screaming through the trees, my flashlight beam bouncing off the fog in weird ways. The deeper I went into the forest, the stranger things got. Leaves hung in the air like they were frozen in time. A squirrel stood completely still on a branch, half of its body see-through like a ghost. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Park Ranger Morrison. Can anyone hear me?" The screaming stopped. The silence that followed was worse. My radio crackled. "Morrison! Breaking up, strange readings." Static took over and then nothing. I was alone. That's when I started noticing the other things. Things that made my skin crawl. A bird's nest had somehow merged with the tree branch it sat on, the twigs and bark twisted together like melted plastic. Near the ground, mushrooms grew right through small rocks, not around them, through them. I'd worked these trails for decades, and I knew every story the old-timers told around their campfires. Tales of hikers who disappeared into thin air. Stories about people who walked through solid rock, never to be seen again. I always thought they were just stories to scare tourists. Now I wasn't so sure. The fog swirled around my boots, moving against the wind. I checked my compass and froze. The needle was spinning in circles, faster and faster, like it was in a blender. My watch wasn't any better. The numbers kept changing randomly, showing impossible times. "Think, Bill," I whispered to myself. What happened before Sarah and Jenny disappeared? The memories came flooding back. The weird weather reports that made no sense. The calls about people seeing things that couldn't be real. The strange patterns in the clouds that looked like giant fingerprints in the sky. Just like now, I found the first real proof I wasn't crazy near an old hiking shelter. A backpacker's tent was half buried in the dirt, but not like it had been, covered. More like it had sunk into the ground like quicksand. The scary part? The lamp inside was still on, glowing through the earth like a buried lighthouse. That's when I heard someone calling my name. "Bill? Bill, is that you?" I knew that voice. It belonged to Mike Thompson, my old rescue partner. The same Mike who quit the service after we found those empty shoes perfectly lined up on Widow's Peak, like someone had just stepped right out of them and vanished. "Mike?" I spun around, trying to spot him in the fog. "What are you doing out here?" "Bill, something's wrong." His voice sounded strange, like he was talking through water. "I can see them now. I know what happened to Sarah and Jenny." My heart stopped. Through the fog, I could make out a shape leaning against a tree. As I got closer, my flashlight revealed something that turned my blood to ice. Mike was there all right, but he wasn't just leaning against the tree. He was halfway inside it. "They're not ghosts, Bill. he said, his face pale and scared. "They're not demons or aliens, they're something older, something hungry, and they're waking up." I reached for him, but my hand passed right through his shoulder like it was made of smoke. "Run," Mike whispered. His voice was fading like a radio losing signal. "Run before they—" The fog surged forward like a wave, and Mike's voice cut off. By the time it cleared, both Mike and the tree were gone. In their place was a perfect stone statue, half man, half tree, with a look of terror frozen on its face. My radio suddenly burst to life with static and a young boy's voice. "Help! They're coming through the walls!" I gripped my flashlight tighter and started running. I wasn't going to lose another person to whatever was hiding in this fog. Not this time. I ran toward the boy's voice, my boots splashing through puddles that reflected nothing. The fog was getting thicker, but now I could see things moving in it, tall, thin shapes that weren't quite human. Then I found the first victim. She was a hiker, probably in her 20s, with a red jacket and hiking boots. Half of her body was stuck inside a large boulder, but she was still breathing, still conscious. Her eyes followed me as I approached. "Can you hear me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They just walked through the rock," she whispered. "Like it was water. They touched me and then—" She tried to move her arm, but everything below her shoulder was trapped in solid stone. "I'm going to get you out," I promised, even though I had no idea how. "No time," she said. "The boy, they're taking him to the old fire tower. You have to hurry." Her voice got weaker. "And please, if you see my sister, tell her." The fog swirled around us, and before she could finish, the stone seemed to pull her in deeper. I watched, helpless, as she slowly sank into the rock until only her face remained visible. "I'll come back for you," I said. "I promise." Her eyes were full of tears, but she managed a small smile. "Run." I did. The path to the fire tower was like walking through a nightmare museum. Everything was wrong. Trees had grown through abandoned cars. Rocks had faces frozen in them, some screaming, some sleeping. My flashlight beam caught a bird suspended in midair. Half of its body turned to glass. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. One of them. It stepped out of a tree trunk like someone walking through a doorway. It looked almost human, but too tall, too thin, and I could see right through it. Its body was made of the same strange fog that filled the air. Where its face should have been, there were only swirling patterns, like smoke caught in a glass jar. It turned toward me, and even though it had no eyes, I knew it was watching me. "What are you?" I whispered. It didn't speak. Instead, images filled my head, pictures of ancient things living in the spaces between spaces, feeding on something inside people, something that made us human. More memories hit me like a punch, through the gut. The day Sarah and Jenny disappeared, they'd been hiking near the fire tower. Jenny had said she saw people walking through trees. Sarah had called me about strange patterns in the fog. The creature took a step toward me. The air around it bent and twisted, and I could feel time going wrong. My watch started running backward. The trees around us aged years in seconds, growing, dying, and rotting all at once. "Morrison, come in, Morrison!" My radio burst to life, making me jump. It was Dave from base camp. "We've got the whole rescue team heading your way. What's your position?" Before I could answer, more fog. Creatures stepped out of the trees. 5, then 10, then too many to count. They moved like a river flowing uphill, surrounding my position. "No," I said into the radio. "Dave, tell them to stay back. Don't send anyone else up here. These things, they're—" Too late. Through the trees, I saw flashlight beams. The rescue team was already here. "Everyone, get back to base!" I shouted. "Now!" But the fog creatures were faster. They flowed around the rescue team like water. Everywhere they touched, people started sinking into the ground, into trees, into the air itself. Their screams echoed through the forest, then went quiet one by one. I ran. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, leaving them behind. But I knew where the creatures were taking their victims. The same place they'd probably taken Sarah and Jenny all those years ago. The old fire tower stood on the highest peak. its metal frame reaching up into the strange fog like a skeleton's hand. As I got closer, I could hear a child crying. The boy was still alive, and maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to save everyone. I checked my gear: flashlight, radio, emergency flares, and the matches I always carried. I remembered how the fog creatures didn't like my flashlight beam, how they seemed to bend away from it. They were afraid of light, of heat. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. I knew what I had to do. I started climbing the fire tower steps, the metal creaking under my feet. Above me, the fog swirled and twisted, forming impossible shapes. They were waiting for me up there, and this time, I was ready for them. The metal stairs of the fire tower rattled with each step. Wind howled around me, but it wasn't normal wind. It was filled with whispers. As I climbed higher, I started seeing things in the fog. Memories, like old movies playing in the mist. I saw Sarah and Jenny's last day. They were hiking, just like in my memories, but now I could see what really happened. The fog creatures had been watching them, following them. Jenny saw them first. "Daddy, look, the people in the clouds!" Sarah had tried to run, carrying Jenny, but the creatures moved through solid rock to cut them off. Just before they disappeared, Sarah had thrown something off the tower, her backpack. The same backpack I found a week later with our family photo inside. I gripped the railing tighter. "I'm coming," I whispered. "I'm finally coming." The crying got louder as I reached the top of the tower. The boy was there, curled up in a corner of the observation deck. He couldn't have been older than 12, about Jenny's age when... "Hey, there," I said softly, moving slowly so I wouldn't scare him. "I'm Ranger Morrison. I'm here to help." The boy pointed behind me, his eyes wide with fear. "They're here." I turned around. The fog creatures were rising up through the metal floor like ghosts. Dozens of them. In the darkness, I could see right through their bodies. Inside each one was something that looked like floating stars. Lights that I somehow knew used to be people. One of the creatures drifted forward. It reached out with a hand made of mist, and suddenly my head was full of pictures. I saw what they really were. Ancient things that lived between worlds, feeding on human souls. They kept their victims alive, trapped in rock and trees, slowly eating their memories, their feelings, their dreams. That's when I saw them. In the creature's chest, 2 lights glowed brighter than the others. One big, one small. Sarah and Jenny. They were still alive, still aware, still waiting for me after 15 years. "Let them go," I said, my voice shaking. "Let them all go." The creature tilted its head. More images filled my mind. Endless hunger, the need to feed, the cold, empty spaces between worlds. They would never stop. Never let anyone go. The boy whimpered behind me. Around us, more fog creatures rose up, reaching for us with misty hands. That's when I remembered the matches in my pocket. The way they feared light. "Hey, kid," I said, not taking my eyes off the creatures. "When I say run, head for the stairs. Don't stop no matter what. Understand?" He nodded. I pulled out my emergency flares and the matches. The creatures drew back slightly at the sight of them. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I whispered. "I'm sorry, Jenny, but I can't let them hurt anyone else." Struck the first match. The creatures shrieked, a sound like winter wind through dead trees. They tried to flow away from the tiny flame, but I was ready. I lit all the flares at once. "Run!" I shouted to the boy. He bolted for the stairs as bright red light filled the tower. The creatures screamed louder, their bodies starting to break, apart in the heat. But they weren't giving up. They surged toward me from all sides. I felt the cold trying to seep into my bones, trying to pull me into the spaces between spaces. I fought back. For Sarah, for Jenny, for everyone these things had taken. The flares burned brighter, and I saw something amazing. The lights inside the creatures, the people they'd taken, were breaking free. With each flash of heat and light, another soul escaped, shooting off into the night sky like falling stars in reverse. I saw Sarah and Jenny's lights rise up together, glowing brighter than all the others. The fog creatures were panicking now. They tried to flee, but the heat had them trapped. The metal tower had turned into an oven. My clothes were starting to smoke. The flares were so hot they were melting the railing. Below, I could hear the boy reaching the bottom of the tower, shouting for help. The creatures made one last try to reach me. A dozen misty hands grabbed my arms, trying to pull me into the stone beneath my feet. I held up the last flare, burning brighter than ever. "This," I said, "is for my family." Everything happened fast after that. The flare in my hand felt like a tiny sun. The fog creatures swirled around me, screaming that horrible scream, but they couldn't get close to the light. More and more lights broke free from inside them, all the people they'd taken over the years. Each one shot up into the night sky like a firefly escaping a jar. I saw the rescue team's lights, the hiker girl from the boulder, Mike, and yes, Sarah and Jenny's lights, glowing so bright they looked like twin stars. But the creatures weren't done. The ones that could still move started sinking into the metal of the tower. The whole structure groaned and shook. They were trying to pull it down, to drag everything into darkness. I had one last flare and the matches. Below, I could hear people shouting, more rescue teams arriving. They had to stay away. These things would just take them to. That's when I remembered something from my rescue training. Fire needs 3 things to keep burning: fuel, air, and heat. The wooden floor of the observation deck could be fuel. The wind up here would feed the flames. And the flares? I looked at the last flare in my hand, then at the lights of Sarah and Jenny, still hovering nearby like they were waiting for me. "I love you," I whispered to them. "I always will." Their lights pulsed once, bright and warm, before fading into the night sky. I broke open the last flare and spread the material around. Took out my matches. The fog creatures were everywhere now, making the air so cold my fingers could barely move. But I managed to light one match. The fire caught fast. The old wood of the deck went up like paper. The fog creatures tried to put it out with their cold, but the flames were too hot, too bright. They screamed and twisted, trying to escape, but the fire was everywhere. The tower shuddered, metal squealed. The flames reached up into the night, burning away the fog, burning away the darkness, burning away everything. I closed my eyes as the heat wrapped around me. In my mind, I saw Sarah and Jenny as they used to be, laughing, happy, free. Then, the tower fell. They found me 3 days later in a crater of melted metal and ash. By all rights, I should have died. The doctors still can't explain how I survived. The boy made it down safe. He told everyone about the fog creatures, about how they moved through solid things, about how they kept people trapped inside them. Nobody believed him at first, but they believed the others. All across the mountain, people were waking up. The Q, hiker girl in the boulder, Mike, dozens of others who'd gone missing over the years. They all came stumbling out of rocks and trees and earth, weak but alive. The creatures' power over them had broken when the fire tower burned. We found Sarah, and Jenny's bodies too, preserved inside an old oak tree. I buried them properly this time, under the open sky where no fog could ever reach them. The official report called it a mass hallucination, caused by unusual weather patterns. They closed the case, tried to forget. But I know better, because sometimes on cold nights when the fog rolls in, I see shapes moving in it. Different shapes now, human shapes. And in the morning, there are messages written in the dew. "Thank you, Daddy," one of them said last week. "We're free now," said another. And yesterday I found 2 sets of footprints in the mud outside my cabin. One big, one small. They walked to the edge of the forest and disappeared. Not into the rocks or trees this time, but into the light. They say fog is just water in the air. That it can't hurt you. That it can't hide things older than time itself. They're wrong. If you're ever hiking in White Mountain, and you see fog moving against the wind or shapes that look almost human floating between the trees, don't try to be brave. Don't try to help. Just run. Run toward the light. And if you hear voices calling from inside the fog, voices that sound like people you've lost, remember my story. Remember what lives in the spaces between spaces. Remember that not all prisons are made of metal and stone, some are made of mist, and they're always hungry, always waiting, always watching. The end.